Hi, my name is Massimo Menichinelli. I'm Master of Science in Industrial Design and Doctor of Arts in New Media Art and Design, and now Associate Professor at Elisava, the Barcelona School for Design and Engineering, first school of design in Spain and our first faculty of design within the University of Vic, University of Central Catalonia. For more than 15 years, I've been working on how to adopt and how to develop design tools, approaches, principles, the whole design culture for working with communities and territories, especially in bridging different communities, different places, different communities and cultures, and how to make possible collaboration, creating systems and processes that bridge all these gaps and connect different places. There is no doubt that we have to find multiple ways, more than one, for making our society sustainable. This has been debated for decades, and finally more and more there is an agreement about this. Now actually the question is how to do it and how to reach the political consensus on moving forward. And the important thing is that it's not about just changing one details, one product. Reaching sustainability is a systemic challenge, because now through the centuries, not just decades but centuries, our society has developed in a way that with fossil fuels and the way it is structured is unsustainable, as we know it. Unsustainable, and also bringing climate change to unstoppable status. So since it's a systemic situation, also any way of addressing it, solution, changes, products, services need to address that dimension. So whatever we design is not just artifacts, it's services, system, infrastructure, and has to work a systemic way. And if it's a systemic problem, it needs systemic solution initiatives, then it means that any kind of transition towards sustainability will have to work with several different types of stakeholders, multiple stakeholders. We are basically all in it together. We need to find a way to move forward together. It's not just up to one single person or a very small group of persons. It's about everybody finding a new way to work together. And it's also a way of finding, discussing, deciding how to move together there. So the idea of collaboration is very important for reaching sustainability, because it's not just about switching one component for another, one material from another, but really changing the way how we live, we behave, we make things, we grow things, we eat, and in general how we live in this planet. Open source communities, not just the software, but the way open source has been developed, it's probably a very interesting approach for organizing such collaboration. There are different ways for creating collaboration. There have been for millennia, but open source is very interesting because it's created a way with tools, with approaches, with principles, a way for creating communities that collaborate, not just in a single place, but everywhere, by collaborating on specific projects, on protocols, on creating infrastructure that bridge different localities from the local to the global. And so what is interesting from open source, what I think is interesting also in open design, is not just the idea that we can download files easily, that we can access files and projects easily, but that we can use this for creating collaborative processes, that we can create new collaborative dynamics between different cultures and communities and find how we can really reach sustainability. It's also important to know that open source has basically been enabled by internet, by digital technology. This is a good way really for easily and quickly connecting everybody and enable communication. But what I would like to stress is that actually it's not necessarily just a question of technology, but a question of culture. It's how we approach working together, and I think it's something that starting from using technology, starting from very fringe communities and few pioneers, is something that could be used everywhere and change our way we work together on our everyday life, with digital technologies, without digital technologies, even with low tech and face-to-face spaces. So let's talk about open design. First thing, let's start from openness. What is openness? Of course, it's a term that can be used in a lot of different contexts and meanings, so it's not necessarily that it has all the meanings. What we are talking about to begin with, and it's very historically defined, is the idea of being able to access the source code of software initially, which means being able to access how software works. What does it mean, source code? Let's make an example from everyday life. Think about a cake. Okay, a cake is something that you can eat. You can, let's say, use it. But how was the cake made? Do you know? Maybe we can guess it. Maybe we can do what is called reverse engineering. I do it a lot with recipes. I try to learn and understand how things were cooked and do it myself. So we can try to learn or experiment, find a way to learn how the cake was made to make another one. But it's not very easy. It takes time. So the best thing is to share the recipe. So then we already know how it's made. We know if we can eat it. We know if there is some food that we cannot eat, or we know how to improve it. So the same thing happened in software some decades ago. In software there is the source code, which is the human readable code, so the code that people write in code. But then these are translated into machine readable code, so the machine, the computer read. It's very easy to go from the human readable to the machine readable, not as much the opposite. So long story short, the idea of open source is that if we give access to how things work, software, but in case everything, people can understand how they were made. They're more free in their dealing with them and adopting them, and in their everyday life, and in their how these technologies impact them. They can modify such technologies. They can redistribute. They can create another technologies built on top of that, and so on and so on. So this is basically a way of empowering people in being more aware about how technologies influence their life, and also be empowered in modifying them and changing them. So technology is not something that you just buy, you just have to use because somebody told you to use. It's something that you can create. So think that really the idea is not something that is closed, and it will always be like that. It's something that you can modify and adapt and make it evolve. This simple principle actually is very interesting because actually can be applied to any kind of technology. So from software, this idea of openness moved to a different kind of context. First to hardware, to cinema, to biology, to food, and to many other kind of things, and especially also to design. Okay? So if hardware, we can think about electronics, like the PCB boards and all the sensor and components. Then we also have all the design part that these electronics need to have. Then also the interfaces, and so on, so on, so on. There are many, many different examples of openness beyond software. So in design, in hardware, and so on. A lot of time they're together. Some important examples start around 2004, 2005. In hardware, for example, the Repro 3D printer or the Arduino prototyping board. And these are very interesting and important because also created a whole ecosystem of projects of 3D printer or for interaction design projects. So really they created the basis for a big part of the maker community on the technological dimension, but also a possibility for more and more projects. And they also have some design components, not just they can be used for design. These also enable people to create and modify technologies in fabless makerspaces at home in DIY in a different way from the industrial product. So of course we need to always understand that different technologies, different manufacturing technology, different places will create different type of products. But they created the beginning for this. And this escalated to a lot of different projects. So now we have open design in probably almost all the types of design we can find. So from fashion design, so now the number of collection of fashion design have grown a lot. We can find a lot of products that are open. We can find even some example of interior design, some restaurants and places, but also some architecture that are open source. We also find a lot of typographic fonts that are open source, so this went also to immaterial with this. Already many years ago, there have been cases of products that were completely open, like the Open Moco mobile phone, which was open in hardware, software, and design, so the whole artifact was open. It was so open that also the manufacturer sold it with a hacking kit, like a small suitcase with all the tools necessary for repairing, open it, and modify it further. There are many initiatives also that try to experiment with open design, especially in the first year of the phenomenon. So we have example like the C chair from the Studios Wine. It's a very small stool that is basically to be made with plastic recycled. Plastic that is found on the beach and then is recycled. So the project details how to do that. The interesting part that there are no specific files. It's not something that you download and print. There are the instructions. So how to pick up the plastic and how to melt it and how to create it. So here open design is really more about the process for designing. Another example is the Open Structure Initiative, which is a grid for creating the infrastructure and the standard for different kind of projects to work together. So here open design is probably more about the rules for working together and more initiatives, from the more experimental to the more conventional. The second important element of open design in general of openness is documentation, because openness is referred to documentation mainly. Then you also get to refer to the process and participation, but the starting point is documentation. We will see all of this. What does it mean in documentation? So for software, it means the human readable code. For design, it means at least 5 different possible things. That is what I realized with my research. This because design in practitioners, but also in the maker movement, when we design something, we can have at least 5 types of documentation. We can have design as a process, so we have the step-by-step documentation of a linear process, typically of how to making things. An example is the website instructables.com. We can have then design documented as the organization of work among the people taking part in a project, so how the interaction takes part in space and time, and so how the design at the end, is an outcome of this collaboration, but we document how the organization works. Then we have another way, which is what we'll normally probably consider design documentation: the blueprint, the CAD files, really the description, the geometrical description of whatever is design. Then we have design as the manufacturing process. This is also, if you want, a big of the change from CAD to CAM, from computer-assisted design to computer-assisted manufacturing. 3D printer, laser cutters, CNC milling machine, and more. They don't necessarily work with the CAD. The CAD is just the geometry of the object. Then we need to translate the geometry into instruction for the machine to operate. So that's the CAM. So having the CAM is already another way for documenting this. But more and more, the idea of manufacturing as something that you can document, create, and improve and scale has changed a lot. So more and more also you can write, for example, software that get access to the APIs of online platforms like Shapeways. So then you can write software that organize how files are uploaded online, 3D printed, shipped, sent to somebody else. So the whole process can be really scripted and documented. And then finally, we have design as the artifact. So the real final object, whatever it is, if it's art, digital or physical, and itself can be documented with pictures, with 3D scanning, with drawings. All of these, they represent different aspects of what we can document in design. It's not necessarily one is better than the other one, is that there are different aspects. So we can see that basically they work on how we work on designing something, on how we organize the work with other people, on what is designed, and all of these can be documented to explain also to other people how to work together in the same project. So we can organize and consider all of these 5 ways for documenting design. And then the first thing that we can see that when we talk of design as a process organization, this is about the collaborative individual work. So how people work together for creating a design. So what's interesting here that we can use open design not just for creating something, but for deciding and discussing how to design things together, how to make things together. Then the typical way we document design, let's say the documentation of blueprint of the geometry, it's more about the project, while the other 2 elements of production and the artifact are more about the output. So you can see, depending on what we want to stress our interest upon, collaborate individual work, the project, the output, we then document all of this. And in all of this, the way we normally document it could be or design or as an execution of activities. The steps could be linear or non-linear for creating something. Design could be also seen as a dialogue between all the different actors involved in designing and making something, or design is something that emerged from the artifacts. So it's really about what we design, what we want to do, how we make it, and now we talk and discuss on how to design and make it. A third important element of open design that I would like to stress and talk with you is about the systems. So I would say that at the beginning, reaching stability is an issue of systemic transition. So all of us should transition in different ways to sustainability. So if open design is a way for creating collaboration with multiple stakeholders to reach those different kind of transitions, so let's see how open design can be seen as a systemic way for doing that. The first thing is important to understand that once we create openness in a project, we cannot really contain it. So openness is not just about the documentation, it's also about the process, and it's also about participation. So what happens, especially in the most successful open projects, they don't just generate one artifact or a family of artifacts, they create an ecosystem of artifacts. So if you think about all the different Linux distributions, there are literally hundreds of them, and each of them learning from each other, trying to evolve and try to create different possibilities. The same can be seen in electronic boards, especially the open source one. They are doing a family, but also the other ones that are based on those and similar ones. So the idea is it will be never closed, not just in documentation also, but in all the possibilities that it can generate. The other important aspect, so we say if this is openness to participation, then openness to process means that the quality and the quantity, but all the different features of whatever we design, they will depend upon the social processes that we enable and we support in designing open projects. What does it mean? That if we open the door to the social dimension be an important part of what we design and how we design, then we really need to focus on that. Because it's not as designing an artifact, it really are designing with people, with complex systems, with people and their culture, emotion, complexities. So it's important to understand that. So managing the community, supporting participation, and be aware of how the participation is developing and caring about how people participate and feel empowered, taking care of them, it's a crucial part of making open design work. So it's important to understand that whenever we engage with open design, it's not just about creating something that we can upload and people can download. It's not a single object, it's not a single artifact. It's basically creating or contributing to a big ecosystem, a large ecosystem, where there are a lot of factors that we have to interact in one way or another, and then we need to know how to do it. But open design gives us a lot of principles, tools, practices for doing it in a healthy way. Another very important aspect of systems in open design, it's about our perception and how we value the centralization of systems. This is something that we start to appreciate thanks to the internet, especially thanks to the first work on planning what will be the architecture of the internet. It's very famous diagram designed by Paul Baran in the 60s about what will be the more resilient architecture of the internet. So a centralized internet will be much more weak and fragile and can be dismantled very quickly because centralized network basically has one node that connects all the nodes. So when the internet started, it was supposed to be a military infrastructure, something that should be able to stand nuclear attack, nuclear war, and connect all the places, even in case of war. So the centralized idea of a network having one hub controlling everything started to be considered, too fragile, too weak, too negative. The idea is that was then to move to more decentralized networks, so when there is not one node in charge of everything, to connect everything, but this ability of connecting is split into different nodes. This is something that is already much more resilient, but in any case, still there are more nodes that can be taken off. Then the idea of the internet was to move to a distributed system architecture. What does it mean, distributed? It means that all the connection between the nodes can be rerouted in real time. There is an idea that we can organize the network and the flows of information and communication. So what is better? What is the best thing between the three? Well, not necessarily one of them. These are different architectures that they do different things. But thanks to this, we start to realize, what are the implications of the different architectures. So we can think that centralized network is basically just a network where there is more connection with a node. Decentralized is just less black and white. It's a more shades of gray thing. So we have less centralization concentrated in one node, but in more. And distributed is more something that we create and we manage in real time. I think we can also add what Massimo calls diffuse innovation, so diffuse networks. So the idea that from bottom up, very few initiatives, people start to connect locally. So we can see that these are different ways networks evolve, and these change through time. So it's not that there is one way for designing them. We need to understand that they keep changing, that we cannot necessarily control everything, but we need to keep understanding how the networks of collaboration, but also the network of infrastructure, the network of supply chain, all the different things that we do, they all are different networks, how they can be organized in a way that we don't have one single point of failure, but also where participation is really open and we have access. And the different kind of architecture, they just support this. So this idea of decentralization has actually been very, very interesting in the past decades, and it created more and more interest. So we tend to talk a lot about it. And what's interesting that we don't just talk it in terms of internet, but in a lot of terms of English and political terms in how public services and governments are organized. But what's interesting that the more and more we are focusing on how we are changing things. So now we are changing our systems and also how we are moving the center, we're shifting the center from one place to another. So it's interesting how to know that, for example, a lot of decentralization has taken place in design in the last decade. And I think we can find the making movement as one specific example where we can see all of these shifts. And it's not the only example, but it's a good example. So we have at least 8 different types of decentralization that are brought by 8 types of phenomenon. DIY design is one way for shifting the center of how it is designed, but also open design is a way for decentralizing this. The network approach in design is another one. Distributed manufacturing, another one. The focus on locality and territories, again. Decolonization is another one. The post-human and more than human aspect is also another one. And the role of data, software, and AI in this is another one. So these are all trends that happen, sometimes connecting between each other, sometimes not, but they're shifting the centers of what we design and how we design. More specifically, they shift the center if what we focus on designing the design processes, or who design, what is designed, where is designed, how, what are the tools that we use for designing, what are the processes and the scale. So it's actually more important to understand that there's not one single way for decentralizing things with open design, but at least 8 trends and 8 different dimensions where we can do it. And the idea is that we can actually decide and design how we decentralize the way we design. So when we talk about open design, it's not just downloadable files, but it's much more complex in terms not of difficulty, but in terms of possibility, of richness of possibilities. Because what we are talking about is how the design is learning from open source, from distributed, decentralized, different networks, and also to peer-to-peer networks, the idea of putting people directly in contact without intermediation. So there are many possibilities. So when I talk about open design, it's more about how we organize, how we work together in design, than just one single way of doing design. So one way, for example, is that we use open design. We adopt open design, peer-to-peer, and these decentralized distributed diffuse networks in design. So it's a way for how we design, how we distribute, or we are inspired by this. But then we can also use design for creating systems, approaches, artifacts, and cultures that replicate and duplicate these open source, peer-to-peer, distributed, centralized, and diffuse networks. So on one side, we can adopt this in design, but also with design, we can also improve how we work with them. And so we can really create our own open design culture that supports collaboration, because things can change. Maybe we need a different type of collaboration. We need to face new processes, new technologies, new emergencies. So being able to reorient also how we design and what is designed, it's a very important thing, and open design gives us a flexibility in that too. One last but very important aspect of systems is open design, is that we always have to take care of which kind of network, which kind of systems are emerging in our projects. This is because they could be more stable, more open, less open, more democratic or less democratic, also like more healthy or less healthy. So it's not that necessarily by starting a project and opening the door, things will be magically happening. Collaboration never magically happens. It's something that we need to take care every day. So it's important to understand really how all the networks take place, how they develop through time, and how we make sure that everybody is connected. One interesting thing is that now we can use more and more digital platforms for doing open design, because what platforms do is basically enable different kind of stakeholders to join together from different places, different communities, also different times. We can work at different times, not necessarily at the same time. So it's also possible to use this platform not just for working together, but also for checking how we work together and the kind of networks that evolve, and how they evolve through time. And now by evolving through time, we can see how collaboration really evolves, and also it's not just between people, but between people and technology, so human and non-human actors. And also how this is connected to our bigger communities. So open design is also a good way for experimenting how we perceive the complexity of designing, but also the social dimension and how we take care of how everybody joins this project, but also how they enjoy this kind of processes. There are many different types of open design. It's difficult to pick one because there are different types of design, and some are digital, some are physical, and some they tend to be more technological, less technological, so difficult to get one case study. But I will suggest this as an artifact. It's a book I edited and co-authored some years ago. It's called Fab Lab Revolution Field Manual. It's been translated to French, English, and Japanese. The reason is because there is a selection of open design projects. So there are several different types of design documented. Open design that can be done in a Fab Lab, and normally I do it in a Fab Lab. And it's not about the design, but for example, even the tools for creating those and all the processes. And especially I would like to talk about an infographic that I developed that explains what are the possible processes in a Fab Lab. So normally we start, with first point, understanding the context, let's say point 0. We develop ideas, point 1. We produce design solution, then we fabricate designs, and then we evaluate them. If they're good, we finalize it. Okay, the concept is done. Otherwise, we keep going back to develop, either finding the ideas and so on. So this is very simple, and it's something that we can adopt in any kind of project. Okay. This again for the idea that open design is not just about artifacts, but how we design together between the digital and the physical. Another very simple object that I think can shows what is open design, even if it's not open design, it's not the typical thing we will relate to open design, is this. This is the classic 4-color pen. Why this? Because this, of course, you can see if you have 4 different colors, it's also basically, it can be used by 4 different people to work at the same time, and each of us can use this if we organize in a group of 4 and use a different color for adding our version, our modification to a project. This is the simple thing. Of course, we can use any kind of set of colored pencil, but the idea of this, I think, was very interesting that we can see in the same project we are more possible version, more possible voices integrated. But again, the main idea is that we don't need complex technology. We don't even need necessarily digital technologies for doing open design. It's just we need to understand that how we collaborate is by let everybody talk together and have their own voice, their own color at the same time and in the same place. So for our exercise in open design, I said before, since normally we use digital technologies and platform and very elaborate approaches, which is great, but for this time we're going to do something simple, because the idea is that we don't need a lot of technology, we don't need a lot of digital artifacts and things, we just need to understand what does it mean to work together in something that is open. So we will remodify again the Exquisite Corpse or Cadaver Keys game, which the surrealist invented, but based on a long list of kids' games from the past, so things that we already done a lot of times. So what you need is, well, a group of friends, okay, different color pens or pencil, in this case a whiteboard, but also paper can be done. The first one start and decide to write or to draw, so I don't know, let's design something, the very boring and typical chair, because we are talking about design. So how could be the first chair to begin with? Could be something like this. And that is the first beginning. Of course, I could add more things, but I will say then, let's give voice to the second friend, the first friend, to the second participant, to either modify the drawing or leave some comments to say, okay, there is something I will do more, or what is this, or what could be improved this.
Sure. So I think my first question would be, which material? Because that will define as well more of the characteristics of the chair. Material.
Okay, then to the other friend.
I guess for me it would be maybe like to make it a bit more tilted.
Okay, so a bit more for resting.
Yeah, so makes it a bit more ergonomic.
Okay. So for example, now it's my turn, we restart the cycle. Then of course we can change the order, but just the beginning for starting. Maybe can ask that we need to something at the end of each leg to make it a bit more stable. I like this, so we'll put +1 to ergonomic. Which material? Maybe we'll, let's say, I don't know, wood.
Classic.
Classic. And maybe I will add, what about this corner? Do we want to be very square or round? I don't know. So, corners. And I'm writing an arrow, so as they did, to point to which part we are discussing.
Sure. So then I would probably answer your corners question and would say option number 1 would be to make rounded corners, or option number 2, in my opinion, would be making the whole thing actually circular. Question mark. Because that will also define the rest of the chair.
I guess in my case I would propose maybe something a bit more flexible than wood, so it could be something recycled plastic.
I like it.
Because also in this case I think it would be nice like to have more flexibility in this part and this the same as this one. And I agree with this, so rounded corners.
Me too. I will add my vote too here.
Rounded corners.
So the good thing is that by using each of us a different color, you already know which, what everybody said, who's the author. Of course, then when we scale this 10 of people, 100 of people, that's when we need to have digital technologies. But it's important to understand the basic concept, and this is something we can do every day when you need to do the shopping list, when you need to write something, whatever you need to do, so at least you know that there are some, it's just simple processes for working together.